All right, good morning, all. If you would be turning to Hosea 10. Hosea 10. We'll need to be picking up in verse 5. All right, let's have a word of prayer and then we'll begin. Father in heaven, we are thankful for the day, for the blessings that are ours. We are grateful daily. We're mindful of those that are not able to be with us this morning, and we ask that they'll be back with us shortly. Pray for those that are sick. Pray for those that have upcoming procedures, and continue to ask your blessings to be upon us all. We thank you for our time of study this morning. Thankful for the classes that are ongoing in the back, and thankful for the efforts that are put forth to teach and train our children, and we ask you to continue to bless our efforts. We thank you so much for your love, sending Jesus to die for us, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, verse 5, and then there was sort of a, I don't know if I would take it as a challenge or not, but Wednesday night after class, someone came up to me in teaching class, and he said, how is it your son gets 3 chapters covered per class and you're getting 3 verses? And so I thought, no, challenge here. And so anyway, we'll just continue at the current pace probably, but you know, Ian's younger, and so he's got more energy and going at a faster rate of speed. Plus he's got 3 times as much to cover in the book of Genesis as what I've got in the book of Hosea. So he can't let any grass grow at all if he's going to get through that book. So anyway, let's turn our attention to verse 5 and read down through verse 11. Verses 5 through 11. The inhabitants of Samaria fear because of the Kath of Beth-aven. For its people mourn for it, and its priests shriek for it, because its glory has departed from it. The idol also shall be carried to Assyria as a present for King Jareb. Ephraim shall receive shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his own counsel. As for Samaria, her king is cut off, like a twig on the water. Also the high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. The thorn and thistle shall grow on their altars. They shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. O Israel, you have sinned from the days of Gibeah. There they stood. The battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity did not overtake them. When it is my desire, I will chasten them. People shall be gathered against them when I bind them for their 2 transgressions. Ephraim is a trained heifer that loves to thresh grain, but I harnessed her fair neck. I will make Ephraim pull a plow, Judah shall plow, and Jacob shall break his cords. So as we turn our attention to these particular verses, then it just seems like the bleakness just continues to grow, because the inhabitants of Samaria, that's going to be referring to the northern tribes of Israel. The inhabitants of Samaria because of the Kath of Beth-aven. Now, if you go back and you look, what's being discussed has been renamed. He's talking about Bethel, Bethel. And the word Beth means house, and of course El means God, so Bethel means the house of God. Now if you go back and you look as well, you're going to see that Bethel was at one time Beersheba. So these name changes occur, and yet God has given them this name, Beth Aven. House of what? If you drop down to verse number 8, perhaps you have a footnote in your Bible where it would say, literally talking about Aven as it's mentioned in this verse, and it'll say idolatry or wickedness. So the house of God, because of the actions of the Israelites, it has now become known as Beth Aven, which is the house of idolatry or the house of wickedness. And that's how it would be noted. And so now, because of the calf of Beth Aven, well, that's going to be an idolatrous what? Calf. And so they had this idol set up, and now because of that, and for its people mourn for it, and its priests shriek for it, because its glory has departed from it. And so God is now identifying the fact that He's going to bring this punishment upon the people, and He's going to cause their place where they had gathered and had worshipped idolatrous ways. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to no longer be a place that they're going to have access to. And the reason is, in verse number 6, the idol shall be carried to Assyria. Now, once again, we got to remind ourselves that contextually, if we put Hosea in that 750 BC time frame, somewhere thereabouts, and it may be roughly in the 740s, but if we just use 750 as a ballpark figure, then they're not going to go into captivity for another 25 years, as when the Assyrians come. So we got 25 years where God has already made this pronouncement that you're going to be carried away. The idol's going to be carried away, and it's going to be presented to this king Jareb, and they're going to present it to him. And it's going to be a present, and Ephraim will receive shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his counsel. Now, we noted earlier as we were looking through particularly chapter 5, where they were turning and going to wrong sources. They were turning to Egypt, perhaps, to have counsel and security, and they were turning to the foreign nations around them and everything. And so God says that Israel's going to be ashamed of his counsel, the counsel that they might have received from this king. Because once again, now we're 25 years in the future before this is all going to culminate in Israel being carried away into captivity. But it is going to happen. Notice now in verse 7, as for Samaria, her king is cut off like a twig on the water. What does that 7th verse convey to us about the king of Samaria? How significant is he in all of this? He's meaningless to this. Folks, if you saw a twig floating down the river, what would that mean? Yeah, I mean, it's just, okay, it's a twig floating down. The king of Israel in all of this is going to be insignificant. Now, the last king of Israel that they're going to be having to deal with is Hosea. And that's going to be found for us in the book of 2 Kings toward the end of that, as he's going to be ruling and reigning when the Assyrians come. And he's going to be an insignificant figure in all of this, because who is determining all of this behind the scenes? God is. And so he is as insignificant as a twig on the water. He's just an insignificant part of all of this. And he says also the high places of Aven, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. The thorn and thistle shall grow on their altars. They shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. So, looking ahead to the future. Now, once again, we got to keep in mind here now that this is still 25 years before the Assyrians are going to come and carry Israel away. That's not going to happen until 721, 722 BC. But notice the imagery. The imagery is when this all comes about, because of the idolatrous practices that they were engaged in. Now he says the king of Samaria is going to be an insignificant point. He's going to be like a twig just floating down the water. He can't stop it. He can't prevent it. There's nothing for him to do at this point. And the high places that they put so much stock in, they're going to be carried away. Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed, and the thorn and the thistle shall grow on their altars. Folks, sometimes, and it's, through the years, just from my point of view, personal, just illustration. When we lived here in Fruitvale, whether it was first home we lived in or the second home we lived a little further out of town, we were very seldom did we cross 19. Had very little reason. We banked in Grand Saline, still do. We went that way. Well, now we've moved that way. Now we very seldom go where? Folks, I very seldom go to Grand Saline. Folks, I can't tell you the last time I went to Austin Bank. I have a dear wife, and she deposits all the money, and she'll go. She takes care of all that. She's here. She runs to town on her lunch break or whatever. She does all of that. But, folks, I very seldom go further west, or east, I should say, than this road right here. But when I do find myself traveling, folks, you'll be absolutely surprised at the places you drive by and you look at them, and they're now what? Dilapidated. They're falling down. I mean, what's happened to them? Care. People maybe not even living there anymore. And I mean, there's places, that I travel and I see them cutting through the country and whatever, And folks, there's one road that I used to keep kind of hot when we lived here in town, and I'd go up and cut through, the Craigleville Cemetery Road. I'd cut through on that, and then I'd go up to, 17. And when I first got here, I didn't really know where in the world I was going. I just knew, I was told that's how you get there, and so I would do it. But the postmistress, whatever she was up here, Joe. Any of y'all remember Joe at the post office? At that time, Larry Fryer and Essie May were here. And so there are a lot of times whenever I would do things for Larry, and I would go up there and I would deal with her a lot at the Postal Service, and so got to know her a little bit and everything. And so she lived back on that Craigleville Road, headed back towards 17. And so I would go there, and so I would see her, or she would say, if you'll come by and drop that off, then I'll take care of it. If I called her, whatever. Anyway, so drove by. And I always liked driving that way because that's where Leonard and Lola lived out there. And you could look through the trees and you could see their place. And, and it was, a bird sanctuary. Any of y'all been by Leonard and Lola's old place any time lately? What has it become? Not what it was when they were there. Now, I'm telling all this not to, say anything negative about anybody and how they're caring for places or whatever, but this is the point. Can you imagine in the minds of those Jews when they went by and they observed these places they once had what? Such esteem and honor. And how does the text describe it to us? What's growing up there? Just weeds. The places have been destroyed. Thorns and thistles are now just taking over the place. And now the inhabitants there, these things are so bleak. What's their response? They say to the mountains, do what? Fall on us. Perhaps in your time you'd go read Revelation chapter 6. At the end of that chapter of Revelation 6, this same phrase is found, where the mountains would fall on us. And it is the picture of judgment, final judgment in Revelation 6. And so you have the small and the great. It doesn't matter who you are, if you're not ready for that great day to come. The text says, for the day of his wrath has come, and they were experiencing it, and they were calling for the mountains and the hills to fall down upon them so that they might protect them from the punishment that God is going to mete out. Well, this is, in so many ways, what Israel, the nation of Israel, had already experienced, because he says, cover us, and to the hills fall on us. So the picture is one that continues to be bleak in Israel. In Israel, O Israel, verse 9, you have sinned from the days of Gibeah. There they stood. The battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity did not overtake them. Now this carries us all the way back how far? Remember, we studied this. It's been a point that Hosea has brought up before in this book, and he says now, remember in the days of Gibeah. That takes us all the way back to Judges 19, 20, and 21. And in that time frame, you know, and the picture was a man's concubine was abused by the Benjamites. And so he got her body and he carried it home. And what did he do with her body? Cut it up into 12 pieces and shipped it to the 12 tribes. And then the 11 tribes joined themselves together, and they came and attacked Benjamin and nearly destroyed the entire tribe of Benjamin. And this is the events that he's talking about. And he says now, in the battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity, and once again, my Bible has a footnote, and some translations will say the children of unruliness. Well, I'm going to say that my idea of unruliness doesn't compare to what took place in Judges 19, 20, and 21. I mean, an unruliness is, you know, you have a child that's just unruly. They're just not behaving for whatever reason at the moment. That's unruly. Well, I think this is a much more serious idea than what we might think of in our understanding of that term, because when you read the context and you read the events, they're horrible. From start to finish, it's horrible. I mean, you had a man who had his concubine, and she is mistreated all night, hacked up into pieces when it's found out she's dead. And folks, you get the image of this. She has her hand reaching for the door. And it's resting there, and that's how he opens the door, and he finds her the next morning, and she's dead. Throws her on his donkey. That's kind of the image you get. And he takes her home. And then he just hacks her up into 12 pieces and sends these to Israel and says, what are we going to do? Well, then they besieged Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, and they nearly killed every man in the tribe of Benjamin. Is sin ugly? And who are we talking about doing this? You think the nations around Israel, when this all was heard and, and described and talked about, you think they just kind of just shook their head in wonder? I mean, why would you ever think of becoming a follower of God if that's the way God's people are going to what? Live and conduct themselves. Well, these people were claiming to be God's children, but in reality, who were they following? The devil. They were following Baal. They were following whatever idols they were worshiping. And so they had long forgotten that they needed to be devoted to God. All right, Dale. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, today the church is spiritual Israel. And so we've got to make application as a body, but we've also got to make individual application. Because we're going to get to a passage and stuff where he's going to talk about the fact that all of Israel has done this. Well, I believe that's accommodative language, because God always had what? Some, a remnant of folks. Even though as we think about the statement, all of Israel has gone this way, has done this. Well, if we use that terminology and understand it, then yeah. I mean, you think about even going back, we had the book of, in the time of the Judges that we talked about in 19, 20, and 21, this horrible event that took place. Well, why did they do that? What is a verse that would indicate this is why they did this? It's the lack of knowledge. But Judges 21:25. Everyone did that was right in their own eyes. This is why this took place. I mean, was the prophet, was the man that was wronged as they mistreated his concubine and all of that, was he wronged? Well, yeah. Was she wronged? Absolutely. Well, why did they do that? Why would that even come up into their mind that we need to abuse this lady all night long? Why? Well, and that's the thing. If if the Word of God does not constrain me, and folks, I'm liable to do anything and everything. I mean, it doesn't matter. And so, as we think about this, the application is stuff that we need to make. And I know we may not have an idol out here, a place that we've got on an elevated hill, and we are, going to that idol, and we're worshiping that idol, and and then, we may not fit that exactly what they were doing. But the point of the matter is, and we've stated this over and over again as we've been through this book so far, I can displace God. He ceases to be number one in my life. He ceases to be my object that I'm striving to please and to serve and to obey. If I can diminish that in any way, then I am to that degree imitating the very people we're reading about. No, it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing about it is, Jesus summed this up. He says there's two gates, two ways, and two destinies in Matthew 7:21 and following. And there are. I mean, there's two gates. I have a gate I can choose. It can be a broad way or the narrow way. There's two gates. There's two destinies that are waiting. And there's two ways to conduct ourselves in this life. Well, the same held true for Israel that we're reading about. I mean, that wasn't something brand new when Jesus announced that in the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, that's the way it's always been. You go back to the garden, to Adam and Eve, what did they have? Two gates, two ways, two destinies. Now, we're still living with the choice that Adam made. Sin brings what? Death. Brings death to everyone. It just depends on how I respond in this life to my sin problem. If I respond appropriately, then guess what? I overcome what? Sin and death. I overcome it. But that's because every single day we're alive, we wake up, and what's the deal? There's two gates, two ways, and two destinies, and I've got to choose which one I want. But that's not anything new. So as we continue to look at this particular lesson, and he continues to teach it, and you remember what I said whenever we began the book of Hosea? The book of Hosea will cause me to check what? What I truly love. It will cause me to do that. Because I'm looking at these folks, and they were the object of God's love. They were the nation that he chose specifically to bring Jesus through. Were they blessed by God? Without a doubt. And even though they turned away from him, still what was his desire? To save them. And we'll talk about that maybe in just a few moments. But notice Israel, verse 9, you've sinned. And he says in verse number 10, when it is my desire, I will chasten them. People shall be gathered against them when I bind them for their two transgressions. And folks, what are their two transgressions? This is something that I've mentioned this, I don't know how many times over the years, but when I sin, how many sins do I actually commit? At least two. Because when I choose to do something I should not do, that's a sin. But when I've made that choice, then I've also chosen not to do something that I should have been doing. Therefore, every time I sin, I'm either sinning by doing something I ought not to be doing, and then I'm also failing to do something that I should be doing. And so sin always comes in twos. Well, if you'll notice, this is exactly what Hosea says. He says, when it is my desire, I will chasten them. People shall be gathered against them when I bind them for their what? Two transgressions. When they devoted themselves to idolatrous worship, that choice by its very nature caused them to forsake whom? Is that two sins? Yes. For their two transgressions. And he says now that Ephraim is a trained heifer that loves to thresh grain, but I harnessed her fair neck, and I will make Ephraim pull a plow. Judah shall plow, and Jacob shall break his clods. So when we look at Ephraim, that's referring to the northern tribes. We look at Judah, that's going to be the southern tribes. And then Jacob is a terminology and a word which is describing all of them. And so when we look, Ephraim is a trained heifer. And y'all remember I pointed out, going back to chapter 4, where we start coming into these things of Ephraim is like, Ephraim is like, Ephraim is like, and we start looking at these analogies that God makes for erring Israel. But now get the image. We have a trained heifer. She comes in, and this trained heifer is trained to do what? Grind the meal. Well, what did those animals get to do while they were grinding the meal? They ate. Okay? When I bring this up, y'all got to understand I'm kind of fighting off the nightmare. But I can remember when my daddy came home and he announced that we were going into the dairy business. I thought, we're going to be milking cows. Well, how often do cows need to be milked? You talk about tied down. But one of the things I learned real quick, it didn't take very long for those cows to figure out where the barn was, where the feed was. I mean, they were what? Trained. That's Israel. You were a trained heifer. But this is what's fixing to happen. I'm going to harness you, and I'm going to take you, and you're going to go to the field, and you're going to what? You're going to start pulling a plow. Things are going to be completely changed for the nation of Israel. The one who had been abundantly blessing them is now going to turn his attention to another course of action, and that's going to be disciplining and chastening them. And so when you think about this, moving on 12 through 15, he continues to identify what they needed to do. And this follows the imagery of the heifer out plowing in the field and the animal out plowing in the field and the work. But now he says to Israel, you need to sow for yourselves righteousness. They'd apparently been sowing what? Unrighteousness. I've oftentimes seen it, and it says, if you don't like the fruit you're producing, then change what? Change your crop. Change your seed. If you don't like what it's producing, then change the seed. Well, sow for yourselves righteousness. Reap in mercy. Break up your fallow ground. For it is time to seek the Lord till he comes and rains righteousness on you. You have plowed wickedness. You have reaped iniquity. But you have eaten the fruit of lies, because you trusted in your own way, in the multitude of your mighty men. Therefore, tumult shall arise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be plundered. As Shalman plundered Beth Arbel in the day of battle, a mother dashed in pieces upon her children. Thus it shall be done to you, O Bethel, because of your great wickedness. In a morning the king of Israel shall be cut off utterly. Now if you go back up to verse number 14, you'll see as it's talking about the battle, as Shalman plundered Beth Arbel in the day of battle. We don't have a record of that anywhere in the Old Testament. We don't have a record of that battle. But we know it was a horrible event, because what happened to mothers? Dashed in pieces upon their children. Now, the audience that Hosea wrote to, you think they remembered it and knew about it? This is an image that this audience could call to their mind. They had knowledge of this. And so they could call this into their mind, but I can't say turn to so-and-so and we read about it. This is not recorded. But it's something the audience knew. But the whole point of this is they were sowing and plowing wickedness. And he tells them in verse 12, you need to sow righteousness. If you sow righteousness, what will you reap? Kindness, mercy. It's time to break up your fallow ground. Fallow ground is ground that has not been farmed or worked in any way. You need to break up your fallow ground. Well, how are they going to break up the ground that had not been turned over or used? Well, they were going to seek the Lord. For how long? Till he comes and rains righteousness on you. You've plowed wickedness. You've reaped iniquity. Now, what passage comes to your mind when you think about you've plowed wickedness, you're going to reap iniquity? Reap what you sow. Galatians 6:7. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that's what he's going to reap. Now you have eaten the fruit of lies, because you trusted in your own way. Is there a passage that might argue against us trusting in our own way? Jeremiah 10:23. It's not in man who walks to direct his own steps. Or even the Proverbs writer says in Proverbs chapter 14 that there is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof is the ways of what? Death and destruction. So now, you've eaten the fruit of lies, you trusted in your own way, and you've trusted in the multitude of your mighty men. Therefore, tumult. Anybody have another word there in your translation other than tumult? Uproar. Folks, this word is conveying the screams and the shrieks and the expressions of anguish that would happen when a people are being attacked. And so he says, this will arise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be plundered. You think about a city, whatever it is, back in those days you'd have the wall, and the wall would be so tall. But what was the most important thing in the city as far as protection? The gates. They could put men up on the wall and they could help to protect, but the gates, that's where the vulnerability was. And so when he says that your cities are going to be plundered, as in the day of Beth Arbel and the day of battle, when a mother was dashed in pieces upon her children, thus it shall be done to you, O Bethel, because of your great wickedness. In the morning the king of Israel shall be cut off utterly. And so, once again now, we're going to see that this bleak time is going to continue as God is going to try to encourage His nation, His children, His people, to break up the fallow ground and to seek what? Righteousness. All right, thank you all for your comments.